Hello, everybody. Um, we are going to talk about a concept today called subject-verb agreement. And I know this sounds like incredibly super fun and exciting stuff, but this is a issue that I've seen come up. It's not the worst problem that you guys have in your writing, but it does come up, again and again. So I wanted to take one of our Thursday lessons and just focus in on subject-verb agreement. And this is a concept that governs how you choose the correct verb to go with the subject of your sentence. So we're going to talk in detail about how exactly you do that, and it can be a little frustrating. This is a thing that you see on the SAT all the time. They try to trick you with subject-verb agreement errors, but more generally speaking, it's a seems like a fairly inadvertent thing that can really mess up the grammar of your sentence. So I'm going to share the screen now so we can look at a PowerPoint. Here it is. And get a slideshow going. So we can look at a PowerPoint about this basic concept in English grammar. So subject-verb agreement. Buckle up. This is going to be super exciting. Okay, the first thing we have to do before we get into subject-verb agreement is think about what a subject is. And this is a super, super important grammatical principle in English, okay? The subject of your sentence, we generally think of as the noun that corresponds with the verb. So whatever the action of the sentence is, your subject is the thing that is doing that action. I think we talked about this in one of our other video lectures, the comma lecture probably, but this is going to get more important as we go into other principles later on in the year. Once we get into our composition tools, this idea of the subject is going to become more and more important. So remember, the subject is the thing that does the action of the sentence. So whenever you assess the grammar of a sentence, your first job is to find the subject, right? The subject is the thing doing the action of the sentence. All right, so we got a couple sentences here. Justin rescued a kitten from a burning building. All right, so just take a minute. All right, this is not the most complex sentence in the world here. Our action in this sentence is rescued. Right? Now we have to then ask ourselves, who is doing the rescuing? We've got a couple of different nouns in this sentence. We've got Justin, we've got a kitten, and we have a building. So which one of those things is doing the rescuing? The answer to that, of course, is Justin. Justin is the one who is rescuing the kitten, right? So the subject of our sentence is Justin. And the verb, the predicate of our sentence is rescued. It's a super simple concept, but English is a very complex language, and it can be very, very simple to sort of take this thing and complicate it beyond all recognition in some really easy ways, which we're going to see later on. Okay, and now we have an even more straightforward sentence here. Bob ran down the street. Bob is obviously the subject because he is the one doing the running, right? The street is not running. Bob is running. So this question of what noun in the sentence is doing the action is going to become very, very important. Okay, so here is the official subject agreement rule that I want you to know. Right? So all subjects must agree with their verbs in number. Now, what is number? That is the difference between singular and plural, right? That is grammatical number. Is it one or is it more than one? So if a subject is singular, then you have to use a singular verb. For example, Tom walks home from school. Tom is our subject here. Tom is singular. There's only one of him. Walks is the singular form of the verb to walk. And notice in regular form, when we want to make a noun plural, we add an S. But when we want to make a verb plural, we take away the S, so that they're kind of opposites. You will have oftentimes, dogs walk behind their masters, right? But a dog walks. So a plural noun will have an S on the end of it, but a plural verb will have no S, and vice versa. A singular noun will have no S, and a singular verb will have an S. So walks is the singular form of this verb that goes with Tom. Right? Now, if our subject is plural, however, then we have to use the plural verb to go with it. So in this sentence, Bob and Tom walk home after school. The subject is Bob and Tom. Well, obviously, we've got two people here. Bob plus Tom means we have a plural subject. So we need a plural verb to go with it. And our verb here, walk, has no S on it. So that is the correct plural form of the verb to go with Bob and Tom. Now, you can see very, very straightforward rule. This is not rocket science, okay? But it can be, there are some really simple things that we encounter every day that make us, misuse this rule in some common ways, and we're going to explore some of those. So let's look at some practice questions here. So the reality television star blank books, right? So how would you fill in that blank? Would it be the reality television star read books, or the reality television star reads books? And I'm sure you can tell right away, just from the sound in your ear, that it should be the reality television star reads books. Okay, so star is singular, and we need the singular verb to go with it, reads. Okay, let's see here. The singers blank bad cover songs. So, do we have a singular verb or a plural verb that needs to go in this blank here? Well, the subject, the singers, is plural, so we need the plural verb, which means we need the one with no S on it. The singers perform bad cover songs. Okay? So this is not tough off the bat, but there are 4 traps basically that can get you when it comes to subject-verb agreement. All right, and so I want to take some time to look at each of these sort of 4 traps, and these are traps that kind of trip up everybody. Okay, the first one is the interrupting phrase, and we're going to look at some really complex examples of what each one of these look like out in the real world when you encounter them in writing. So an interrupting phrase is just anything that comes between your subject and your verb. It makes it more difficult to tell what the right verb should be. Reverse order can get rather tricky when it comes to making sure that your subjects and verbs are paired correctly, and we'll look at how that works. Compound subjects are where it tends to get kind of frustrating, but I'll give you some really clear rules on how to deal with that. And then the one that makes everybody want to rip their hair out are just these subjects with ambiguous numbers that can be a little tricky to deal with. So we're going to take these one at a time, and we'll look at how to correct for errors in each one of these. So trap number 1 is the interrupting phrase. And what we mean by this is just anything that you can stick in a sentence that comes between the subject and its verb. So let's look at this sentence here. The rhythm of the pounding drums is intoxicating. Now, it would be very easy to say the rhythm of the pounding drums are intoxicating, right? That sounds perfectly fine, right? But this sentence, as it is written, is grammatically correct. So we have to ask ourselves, and this is where the question of what is the subject becomes very, very important. We have to ask ourselves, what's the verb, all right? And our verb is right here. Now we have to ask ourselves, what is the noun that is doing that action or that being that goes with is? And the answer is the rhythm. The rhythm is intoxicating, okay? And we have this little phrase here of the pounding drums that is being sort of stuck between our subject and our verb. And this complicates things for a couple of reasons. Number 1, it just makes it harder to hear what the right thing is. So, you've been doing this your whole life. This is probably just the first time that you've actually stopped to think it through. So generally speaking, you know the correct verb to use just because of the way it sounds, right? And so if I said the rhythm are intoxicating, you would know immediately that that is not the right verb. But since we stick this interrupting phrase in the middle of it, it's harder for your ear to pick up on the fact that it's not correct, because the rhythm of the pounding drums are intoxicating sounds a little bit more okay in this case. And the reason for that is that we have this second noun in here. So this is a prepositional phrase, and we'll go over prepositional phrases in a later lesson. But whoops, what happened here? Okay. But this is a little prepositional phrase that tells us, well, what rhythm? Like, what rhythm are you talking about? It's the rhythm of the pounding drums, okay? But drums is not the subject of the sentence. So we should not be pairing drums with is. We have to pair is with rhythm. And drums, however, is right next to the verb, which makes it sound like to your ear that it should be drums are intoxicating, because normally if drums were the subject, that would be the correct verb to use with it. But in this case, drums is the object of this prepositional phrase. It is not the thing that corresponds to is. And so this question of what is the subject is of primary importance when you want to deal with this problem and many other problems in grammar. First job, remember, always number one job, find the subject. Okay, so let's look at this in practice. So my boss, who is extremely kind to his employees, blank helpful advice. So what is the subject of this sentence? So we've got this blank here, give or gives. Well, who's doing the giving? I'm sure you can tell fairly immediately that it's boss. Okay, now the way this is written is it's really easy to try to match your verb to employees, but employees is not the subject of this sentence. Employees is the object of this little prepositional phrase, which lies inside this non-restrictive modifying phrase. So it should be fairly easy, however, to spot the simple fact that employees are not doing the giving. The noun doing the action is boss. So it should be my boss gives helpful advice. Okay, my sister, one of the most social people, blank class, elected class president. So my sister, one of the most social people, blank elected class president. So your primary question you need to answer right now is, what is the subject of this sentence? Is it sister or is it people? So it should be fairly easy to spot right now that sister is the thing that corresponds to this verb, right? So one of the most social people, if you remember back to the comma rule lesson, is an appositive that is describing sister, right? But this one of the most social people is not the subject of the sentence. Sister is doing this verb. So my sister was elected class president. So if at any time you find yourself dealing with an interrupting phrase that's coming between your subject and your verb and you're not sure how to deal with it, best thing to do is just cross out that interrupting phrase and then read your sentence like that. And it should sound instantly better. So if we read, carbonated beverages, my favorite drink, are not good for your health, that sounds weird, right? To say carbonated beverages, my favorite drink, are not good for your health, because drink is right next to the verb are. If, however, we cross out this interrupting phrase, we get carbonated beverages are not good for your health. That suddenly sounds perfectly fine, okay? So just remember, anytime you think you're dealing with an interrupting phrase that's mixing up your subject-verb sort of order, then just cross out your interrupting phrase and then say it out loud, and it should read just fine to your ear. Okay, reverse order is another trap that really gets students messed up when it comes to subject-verb agreement. So let's read this sentence here. In the trunk of my car resides 15 empty water bottles. Okay, so to figure out if this is correct, we need to ask ourselves, what is the subject of this sentence? Now, this is a little difficult because this is not the typical sentence order. English is a Germanic language, and so Germanic languages have a much looser sentence order than Romance languages. However, we have a very, very strong, very old Latin influence in English. And so we like it when our sentences come at us in subject, verb, object order. That's why we are called an SVO language. And so usually when a sentence comes at you, it comes at you in subject, verb, object order. So I hit the ball out of the park, right? I is the subject, hit is your verb, ball is your object, subject, verb, object. Now, because we are a Germanic language, we can reverse that order and still understand it, right? You can say the ball was hit out of the park by me. That's what we call passive voice, right? So we don't like the sound of passive voice because we have such a strong Latin influence, but we can do it because we're a Germanic language, and that ability to just mix up our sentence order so much can cause some grammatical problems. So if you say, in the trunk of my car resides 15 empty water bottles, all right, we first have to deal with the fact that trunk of my car is not the subject of this sentence. Okay? We have to find our verb, which is resides, and then we have to think to ourselves, what's doing the residing? Well, the trunk is not residing, right? Something in the trunk is residing. So in the trunk of my car is yet another prepositional phrase. You're going to find that prepositions and prepositional phrases can cause all kinds of grammar shenanigans, right? So what is doing the residing? Well, it's all the way over here. It's bottles, right? So is bottles, right, the correct subject to go with resides? Well, bottles, is that singular or plural? Bottles is plural, obviously. So would you say 15 empty water bottles resides in my trunk? Right? I'm pretty sure that once you reverse that order back, you can hear that no, that's not right. Okay. Oops. So when you have a reverse order problem, just switch the order back once you have identified the subject. Okay. So in the trunk of my car resides 15 empty water bottles. Take your subject, drag it up front, and start your sentence that way. 15 empty water bottles reside in the trunk of my car. Okay. So bottles is plural, therefore for the plural verb, we drop the S. And so the correct way to say this is, in the trunk of my car reside 15 empty water bottles. And it sounds funny, but that is grammatically correct. And that's one of the more common errors I see you guys making, is when you have some sort of reverse order sentence. You tend, at least half the time, to get the wrong verb in there. So I want you to watch out for that. Okay. Okay. Other sort of reverse order problems can come from sentences that begin with there or here. And just look at some of these examples. What's important to remember is that there and here, when they start a sentence, are never the subject. And we won't get into what the actual function of these things is. That's, unless you want to go on to be like a grammarian at a style house or something. That's not that important. What's important to remember is that they're not the sentence. Okay, so we have this sentence here: there were 5 books on the shelf. What's being on the shelf? It's not there. 5 books were on the shelf. So once again, this is just reverse order. Okay, this is it's just a way of emphasizing what is the thing that is being on the shelf. Okay, but it's the subject, the thing that's doing the action, is the 5 books. So we have our verb, then we have our subject, then we have our prepositional phrase. So it's reverse order. So just remember, 5 books were on the shelf. Right? You wouldn't say that. It's easy, especially when you have a contraction. It would be easy to say there's 5 books on the shelf, right? But there is 5 books on the shelf would be the long form of that contraction. That's not grammatically correct. It would be there were 5 books on the shelf. Okay, and the same thing with here is the report you wanted. Report is singular, so we need is, the singular verb. Okay? So just be on the lookout. Anytime you see something other than subject, verb, object, order, be careful of the subject-verb agreement. that you've got there. So this is a little more complex here. What's wrong with this sentence? Skipping school is fun, but less fun is its consequences. Well, we have a compound sentence here, right? We've got two independent clauses. Skipping school is fun. It's one independent clause. And then we've got the second independent clause. Less fun is its consequences. All right. So remember what the definition of a clause is. So a clause is a phrase that contains a subject and a verb. So you can have more than one subject-verb pairing in a sentence. That's the definition of a compound sentence. So we've got skipping school is fun, but less fun are its consequences. So let's break this down. Clause number one, skipping school is fun. Our verb is, right? What's doing the ising in this clause? Well, it's skipping school. Okay, so this is an action that we're treating like it's a noun. This is what we call a noun phrase, or a gerund in this case. So skipping school, we're treating it as a noun, and that thing, that abstract concept of skipping school, is the thing that's fun. So we're going to learn in a minute that abstract concepts are singular, so is the right verb. Okay. However, then we go to our second clause here, but less fun is its consequences. Well, now we have to ask ourselves, what's the subject of this clause? Is it fun or is it consequences? But less fun is its consequences. Well, if you think about it for a second, you realize consequences is the thing that is fun, right? You wouldn't say fun is consequences. You say consequences is fun. So because consequences is the noun that corresponds to this verb, we have to ask ourselves, is consequences singular or plural? Well, it's plural, right? So we need the plural form of to be, which is not is, it's are. So we need but less fun are its consequences, right? So a better way to write this sentence would be something like, the consequences are less fun than skipping school, right? So when you find a subject-verb pairing that is in reverse order, the best way to figure out if you've got the correct pairing is just reverse it back and see what sounds right, right? The tricky part, however, once again, is identifying that subject. All right. Compound subjects can get a little tricky here. So a compound subject is formed when you have two or more things connected with and. So we were looking at Bob and Tom earlier, right? You can think of and like it's a plus sign in math, right? And by definition is additive. Okay? So a singular plus a singular equals plural by definition. So Bob is singular, Tom is singular. Bob plus Tom is plural, okay? So you wouldn't say Bob and Tom walks to the store. That would be pairing it with the wrong number. Bob plus Tom is plural, so we need Bob and Tom walk, all right? Again, pretty simple, but there's some really common ways that this gets a little frustrating. And the first one is when you have things that are joined by or nor. Right? So we have to think about this for a second and think, okay, so an and is like a plus sign by definition. If I say Bob walked down the street and Tom walked down the street, I could say Bob and Tom walked down the street. They're both going, therefore it is plural. But what if they're joined by or nor? Well, that is no longer plural. If I say Bob or Tom are walking down the street, well, they're not both going, right? One of them is going. It's not specified which one, but it's Bob or Tom. So by definition, it's not both of them. It stays singular. This is where it can get a little bit tricky, okay? So here is the rule. When subjects are joined by or nor, the verb agrees with the noun closest to it. And we do this for a couple of reasons. So or is not additive. So if you have two singulars, Bob plus Tom, well, then those two things together equal plural, all right? What, however, what if you have two different nouns of two different numbers? For example, Bob and his friends. Well, Bob is singular, friends is plural. So which one, the or itself doesn't make it plural, but you've got things of different numbers. So which one should you match up to the verb? And the answer is the one closest to the verb. Okay? So if we look at this first example, Bob or George is leaving. That sounds a little funny, right? Bob or George is leaving, but that is grammatically correct. Most people would say Bob or George are leaving. But that's not right? Because or does not make it plural. It's either or. Only one of them is leaving. By definition, that it's got to stay singular. So the correct way to say this is Bob or George is leaving. Alternatively, if you have nor, you would say neither Bob nor George is leaving. And that sounds even more appropriate to say neither Bob or George are leaving. But that would not be grammatically correct. These are things that we mix up all the time in conversation. But when we are writing, we have to pick the right verb. Okay, now it gets a little tricky when we have neither Bob nor his friends. In this case, it would be are leaving. So once again, we have nor, which is not additive, okay, but Bob is singular and friends is plural. So the verb would change to are because the noun closest to the verb is plural. So we take a plural verb. If you reverse that order and you say neither his friends nor Bob, then it would go back to is. And this is where a lot of students get tripped up here, okay? So if things are joined by or nor, the verb agrees with the noun closest to it. Okay, here we get into some really common, issues with subjects that are just ambiguous. You look at them and just on the surface, it can be really hard to tell, is it singular or is it plural? So these include subjects like each, someone, right? Either, somebody, everyone, right? These, believe it or not, are all singular, even though it kind of seems like they should be plural. So if you say everybody, well, that really does sound like it should be plural, right? As you look at a room and you say, everybody, come with me, right? But make a really simple sentence here and think to yourself, what is the appropriate verb to go with everybody? So just think of like the most simple sentence you can come up with, like everybody is going to the party. Everybody is going to the party. Is a singular verb, and that's right. And you've been saying it that way probably your whole life. Everybody is going to the party. So even though it seems like everybody is plural, it's not. Everybody is singular. Okay, same thing with anybody or everyone, right? Everyone. I mean, when you really break it down and think it through, it kind of makes sense. I mean, one is right there in the word. It's short for each and every one is going to the party, right? So these, just be on the lookout. And anytime you come across one of these just really ambiguous things that seem like they should be plural, just stop and make a really simple sentence with it and trust your ear, because you've been saying it right your whole life. It really only becomes a problem when you stop and you get into a rather complex sentence and you have to stop and figure out the correct verb to go with it. Okay. All right. Let's see. Yeah, we just looked at that. Okay. Now these are things that can be singular or plural depending on how you use them in the sentence. So this includes some, any, all, or most. Okay. So these examples are all grammatically correct, even though it can seem a little difficult to figure out why. So most of the news is good. Okay, so that is correct. However, most of the flowers were yellow. That is also correct. So we have to ask ourselves, what's the difference? And the difference here is in the object of the preposition that goes with the subject. So most is good, but most of what? Well, the rule is that when you're dealing with some, any, all, or most, you have to ask yourself, most of what? And if the thing that it is most of is singular, well, then the verb stays singular. And if it's most of something plural, then the verb goes plural. So for example, most of the news is good. Well, news, even though it has an S on it, is a singular thing. It's an abstract concept. You would say, the news is good today, right? So just based on that sentence, you can tell news is paired with is, therefore news is singular. It's just this singular abstract concept that we think of as all the information we need to know. So most of something singular stays singular, okay? Flowers, on the other hand, is plural, okay? So you have a bunch of flowers, that's a plural thing. So most of something plural, you need a plural verb to go with it. So you'd say most of the flowers were yellow. And same thing with pizza, children. All of the pizza was gone. So pizza is a singular thing. So we take a singular verb. All of the children, however, well, children is plural. Right? Now, it's just important to remember that news, flowers, pizza, and children, these are not the subjects of your sentence, right? Of the is a classic signal of a prepositional phrase, and prepositions by definition cannot be the subject of your sentence. So most is good, all was gone, most, all, those were the subjects of your sentence. Okay, okay, so look back here, ask me anytime you get in this situation. It can be a little tough to sort of decode what you're dealing with here, but if you just remember some, any, all, or most of what, ask yourself, is the what singular or plural? That will give you your verb. Okay, collective nouns, I mean, these are not as tricky. I think we all get how collective nouns work. Okay, so these are things like team or crowd or committee, right? These are singular verbs that stand for a group of people. Okay, so the team is on the field, right? A team is comprised of multiple people, but we treat it as this one singular object composed of multiple parts, right? Same thing with committee or jury or audience, right? However, and this is not the most common, but you can treat them as plural as well. So let's look at these examples. The orchestra is playing a hit song. So this is your classic, just taking orchestra as a collective noun, treating it as a singular thing. So collective nouns just sort of default to being singular unless you see a specific reason why it should be treated as plural. And in this second sentence, we have some reasons why we should treat it as plural. So the orchestra were asked to give their musical backgrounds. So our signals here that tell us we should be treating this as plural are their and backgrounds. Okay, so their, I know, you know, political correctness in the moment would lead us to believe that, you know, they and their can be treated as singular. And in conversation, we often do. I do it all the time. In formal academic writing, however, we have to remember that they and their are always, always, always plural. And I enforce that mainly because while a number of different style houses are moving toward accepting they and their as singular, the SAT has not. The SAT is not woke. And so I'm going to enforce they and their as plural pronouns because that's what you're going to face on the SAT. And we're going to do it that way until it changes. Okay, so you can see here that this time orchestra is being treated as a plural group of people, right? They were asked to give their background. So their and backgrounds are both plural, which tells us orchestra is being treated as plural, therefore were should be plural as well. Okay, this is the one that drives everybody nuts, right? So expressions of time, money, measurement, and weight are singular when it's considered one unit. So the best way to think of this is when something is an abstract concept, it is a singular thing, okay? So when you can say that, you know, there's $5 are sitting on the table over there, okay? Or you could say the book costs $5, right? And $5 is too much to pay for that book. So why would $5 sitting on a table be plural, but $5 as a price be singular? Well, the answer is a price is an abstract concept. It's just thought of as this single unit. It's one thing, right? So when you have multiple dollars being treated as a price, then you use the singular verb. And when you have multiple dollars being used as, a collection of physical things laying on a table, well, then it's plural. Okay. Same thing with units of time. 10 days is not nearly enough. Right. So in this instance, 10 days is a single unit of time, and so we use the singular verb to go with it. Okay. So on occasion, these things can be used in the plural sense, such as there were 30 minutes to count down. And this can be a very tough thing to kind of distinguish sometimes. Okay, so as a general rule, anytime you're dealing with something abstract like this, time, prices, weights and measurements, just treat it as singular, okay? Because it's not that these other instances don't come along, but they're much more rare, okay? And if you come across one, just ask me and we'll discuss it. All right. Okay, so another one to remember are measurements that come in volume. So things that are countable and uncountable in a sentence. For example, you would say, if I have 10 gallons of water, you would say, how much water do we have? That is an indication that it's uncountable. It's a unit of volume. But we'll get into the modifiers that go with these in a later lesson. But you just have to start to think, are these things abstract, or are they physical and discrete and countable? And if they are abstract, well, then it's singular. Okay. Okay. And then some of these, this one's pretty simple. Very few people get mixed up on these, but I'll throw it in here anyway. Some things look like they're plural just because they have an S on the end, like mathematics or physics. Awful lot of subjects in school just happen to end in S. Also, diseases, for some reason, like a bunch of them just happen to end in S. That doesn't necessarily make them plural, however. Okay, so mumps. Mumps is not plural. It's the singular name of a disease. Like when I was a kid, I was really confused because I didn't know what a single mump was supposed to be. If it was like a bump you get on your skin or something. But mumps is just the name of the disease. It's not a collection of multiple. There aren't many mumps. Okay. Also, the thing you have to look out for is something like statistics, because there are two different kinds of statistics, right? There's statistics, the name of the subject you study in school, but there's also like the data you get, the actual numbers that you get as the product of statistical analysis. We call that statistics too. So that when you are using statistics as the name of the subject you study, then it's singular. But if you're talking about the numbers you get as a result of doing statistical analysis, well, that's plural. All right. And then last but not least, this is just a quirky little thing that we all run into. Data or data is plural. The singular form of data is datum, which is a word that we just like never use anymore. I've never heard anybody use it, but that is the singular form of data. So it's not uncommon, especially if you're writing in other classes, to talk about data. So you would, but remember, data is plural. So you don't say the data shows, right? We would probably, even I would probably say that in conversation many times, but that is grammatically incorrect because data is plural. You would say the datum shows, but if you're talking about data, the data show. And it sounds weird because we just don't use it as plural anymore, but that is the grammatically correct way to say it. So just always remember, data is plural. Okay, so I think that is, I'm going to stop sharing here. All right, that is our subject-verb agreement lesson. So I left an exercise for you to do in the folder. have fun. I know this is really super exciting stuff, but it will greatly improve your writing once you start to look out for making sure that you are matching up your subjects and your verbs correctly. So hope you enjoyed that for as much as a subject verb agreement can be enjoyable, and I will see you in class.